Like if I just told you, if I said, hey, we can grow all this food, all the food in the world that we need. We know how to do it. We can do it in such a good way that creates great taste, great flavor. It's nutritious. It's good for the environment. It's sustainable. And then I said, but you know what? We're going to actually we're not going to do that here. We're not going to do that here. We're just going to buy it, but we're not going to buy it from like people in our community. We're going to buy it from people, we're going to buy like one part of it from a farm 1,000 miles away. And then we're going to ship it all the way over here. That just seems, I would just think as a community, we'd say, what we solve for the food, we solve for the shelter thing, we solve for the energy thing. I don't know, we'll just give up the food part.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
Guys, what is happening? Welcome back to the Dr. Ben Tapper's podcast. Super excited to be here. All right. Well, I'm sitting down with a good friend of mine, Mathew Winters. How the heck are you, buddy?
I'm doing absolutely spectacular. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, well, it's good to be here. It's good to see you again. I was just at your farm here last fall. It was an amazing farm, Cottage Pastures. Why don't you put a plug in for that, Mathew?
Yeah, Cottage Pastures. So cottagepastures.com, that would be the website. And, I firmly believe we raise food in the absolute best way possible. Everything is organic fed, fermented feed for broilers and pigs, and grass-finished roast veal, lamb, just the whole thing. It's honest. It's just it really is a privilege and an honor to be at this point where, we're shipping meat to feed people all over the United States. We've got people reaching out to us for all kinds of, food. And, we also raise seed garlic. It's just, honestly, I love farming. I love homesteading. I love being a part of this. I love that my family, my children are a part of it. It's one of the greatest joys in my life that I get to run Cottage Pastures with my children and my wife. And we get to go out and, we're moving chickens across the farm and cows over there, and, pigs are out in the woods, and, then people are buying the meat that we sell them, and they're sending us back reviews and comments. They're like, this is some of the best stuff I've ever had. And this isn't food, this is medicine, or this is nutrition. And this is it's just so different. And it's a model that can be easily repeated if people just really cared and want to do it. And it's so good for people.
Yeah, well, I love it, man. I love what you're doing. The farm out in Indiana is so beautiful, and it's just like, I love what you got going on there. And, it was such a privilege to go out and see what you guys got going on. Just from, I've learned so much just in the last year about just, how, farming methodology and how we're raising these animals. And, I was telling my wife, about just I showed her, we buy this organic chicken from Costco and you bring it home, and, and it says, 7 to 10% of the fluid that's retained in the chicken that you buy and you pay for is part of the chilling process. And I was telling her, this is like a chlorine bath. What you pay for, that fluid is not an organic material. It's not a natural occurring material fluid. It's part of that dunk tank that they do with every processed chicken, except for the air cooled. This is why your chicken's different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, isn't that so interesting? And that's one of the things people don't even know that. They're wondering, why is there all this liquid, flowing out of my chicken when I put the chicken breast in the skillet? And, what is this? It's gross. It tastes watery. It's, I'm paying for some water. We're really privileged to have access and great partnerships with USDA processors at air chill only. And those are the only facilities we take our chicken to, is those who guarantee that it's air chilled. And effectively what that means is that instead of, when you take a chicken into a processor, it it's hot, just like, we've got a certain temperature. Well, they do too, and so they are legally required to lower the temperature to a certain degree really quickly to prevent, bacteria and things that would make you sick. So you basically have two ways to do that. You either throw it in a pool of water that likely has some kind of chemical additive or something to neutralize it or sterilize it, or you can air chill it, which is what we have our processors do, which basically means they put it in, kind of a high airflow environment that's very, very, very cold, kind of like a freezer, really, with fans in it. And the net result really is when you get to cooking it, instead of all that liquid then seeping out into your pan and messing up your seasonings and everything else, is none of that extra, there's no extra moisture added in there. So your seasonings then are absorbed into the meat, and it creates a better texture too. So the cooking quality is incredible. I know we talk about the health qualities a lot too, but really like the taste of it and the texture of it is so much better. It's hard to even explain. You honestly have to try it, and immediately you're sold on it because it's just better in every way. Crispier, better flavor, better texture, all around good. And it's incredible because this is a model, it's not a model that's very well available to a lot of farms. It's something that is really important that people understand. A lot of farms are doing their absolute best, and they don't even have access to things like this. In the United States of America, there's probably my guess at this point is probably a dozen or less USDA facilities that would that do air chilling. And of those, only a certain set of them are going to accept farmers, to bring their own chickens to them. So you're going to start to see over the coming year more air-chilled chicken, but it's not necessarily going to come from small-scale farmers like us because a lot of them don't even have access to facilities that would allow them to bring their chickens to them and process them. It's just not something that's out there right now based on a lot of economics and, some other reasons.
So tell me, walk me through what's in the concoction that they dunk these chickens in?
Honestly, it can be a variety of things. All of these things are extraordinarily documented. When they go into like a federal facility, they have certain plans that they have to follow by. So I know a lot of people talk about, certain things that come as like buzzwords, and all I can say is, without like specifying a particular, synthetic chemical or natural additive or whatever it is that I think consumers ought to be aware that it's not just how the farmer raises the food. It's what happens when he drops it off to the facility. Because a lot of the battle for food sovereignty and nutritious food and even tasty food occurs at the processor. It doesn't always even occur in the fields of the farm. So a lot of farms are doing things absolutely phenomenally, but then their product becomes not necessarily contaminated, but maybe made subpar by the way that it's ultimately processed. It's equally as important.
Yeah.
And it's something a lot of folks, unless you're really into like the idea of the food chain and how your food makes it to you from, the field to your table, you might not have even thought about this. But there's a second pair or a third or a fourth pair of hands handling that meat besides me. And so what I do and our farm does, we go and meet them, or we have extensive conversations. We go to the point between, like our feed mills and the processors, the point of, opening up the conversation of like written documentation supporting exactly what you're saying. Because when I turn around and I tell people that this is what we're doing for our customers, this is what I expect is happening. And if not, I'm going to make sure I understand who to hold accountable for failure to abide by these expectations, because I believe that food is often tied to, the way we raise food is tied to what I believe is the dignity of humans. Mm-hmm. So if you're taking my chickens that I've spent 6, 7, 8 weeks ensuring that they're not receiving vaccinations, that they're moving daily, that they're not getting sick, that they're eating, an organic diet, that they're getting the right grains, right treatment, right support, and then you affect that negatively, that is dishonorable.
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a leader in the emerging wellness paradigm taking shape across North America and beyond. People everywhere are recognizing that the old sick care model, quick fixes, symptom chasing, and surface-level solutions simply isn't enough. Ezra Healing is a part of the shift toward truly patient-centered care that prioritizes well-being, integrity, and a do-no-harm approach. At Ezra Healing, your whole lifestyle, rhythms, and patterns are considered to better support the interconnected systems of your body. They're focused on real solutions, long-term health promotion, and prevention, an evolving grassroots movement dedicated to helping individuals and families live healthier and more resilient lives. If you're ready for a wellness experience that puts humanity first, Ezra Healing is guiding the way. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now back to the show.
And that's unfortunate.
And I think that's the whole problem with our food care system. We've gone away from how God designed it to be. I mean, look at the industrial chicken farmers. I mean, they wake up, they can't sleep at night because they're terrified of some disease breakout in their industrial chicken farm.
Yeah.
And and I think you sleep soundly. And
I don't even think about it. Yeah. I don't even think about it. That in 2025, I think it was early 2025. All the avian flu conversation was massive. And people say, are you concerned about chickens, on the ground on your farm and birds flying overhead? Not at all. Why would I be concerned? My chickens are not confined. My chickens move. They spread about. If I ever noticed a sick one, I could easily spot it because I'm actually out there with them, observing them every day. I interact with them. And that doesn't happen. That's just not the way that it works. We're not... there's not like some flu isn't falling out of the sky and infecting this particular flock that's moving across this particular pasture that I have. And even if a chicken got sick, we're so attentive and so hands-on with all this, we can spot things immediately. And we don't have to come back and, inject them with some kind of antibiotic or anything. Nothing. You just don't need those things in a good pasture-based system.
Right. So that goes to say, we are majority of farms. I mean, what percentage of chicken farmers are raised in these industrial pens versus the air chilled?
Oh, it's an absolute majority. When I say majority, I mean, we probably don't raise more chickens in an entire year selling all over the United States than is consumed in one fast food restaurant line in one day. Like quantities.
Say that one more time.
So we probably, in an entire year on our farm, couldn't even raise enough chicken to meet the demand of one fast food restaurant, a full day worth of work, a chicken sandwich for the whole entire day.
Yeah.
Because if you think, like, maybe you go to, this question came up with a major fast food restaurant recently about, how many cows are out there and how many burgers are being sold a day, and does the math equate, There is an interesting idea there when people ask, how many chickens are raised or how many cattle are raised and how are they done in this regenerative, way. Well, if you consider how much is actually consumed, if you could add all of us up together, and we are not even a drop in the bucket, not even a drop.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, millions of birds are getting.
It's unbelievable. The number is hard to even quantify.
Yeah,
well, insane. I mean, we can quantify it, but it's hard for us to understand the number of birds.
Think about that when next time you guys buy a 30-piece chicken nugget at Chick-fil-A. Come on, guys. Right? It's like, where are these birds coming from? I heard that just with McDonald's. I mean, they sell, I don't even know, millions and millions of so-called burgers a day, but we don't even have enough cows to supply that demand for that many burgers. I mean, so what's in the burger? Right.
It's really funny. People will have 1,000. We typically raise chickens in batches of 500 or 1,000, and because we actually let them free range, they're outdoors, and so people will drive down the road and they'll look over, and you can see them like eyes wide open, like, what is that? Look, how many? That's an enormous amount of chicken. And I'm like, not really. I mean, yes, this is a lot of chicken. Like, we should be very aware that this is a lot of animals right here, right now in this particular pasture. But in the context of how much you alone would eat in an entire year, it's probably not really a lot of animals. Dude, something really to consider.
It's 100% something to consider. I mean, think about that. But the tides are turning. And, I think the tides are turning. And this is why we're having this conversation, because the more we are educated on this topic, we can vote with our dollars. We can support farms like yours. We can help other farmers. And, we can literally... Our dollar can go a long way, and we vote with our dollars. Do we want more of this, or do we want more of this industrial type of garbage that we are funneling to the masses now? So I want change to occur, but I think that we are headed for a massive cliff or a bubble or whatever you want to call it, But either way, we zoom out at a 30,000 sky foot view. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that we are headed for a massive food crisis with our farming
Right.
industry. Most of our beef now is coming from out of the States. It's, people don't want to farm. We've lost how many hundreds of thousands of farmers over the last 50 years here. It's insane. And so talk to us about that.
Yeah, it's incredible. One of the things that I'm incredibly passionate about at this point is helping other small farms get started. Finding a way to create a profitable enterprise that supports you and your family and your local community. And part of the reason why is it's twofold. It's one, from a safety standpoint, communities that don't have access to actually like food that's being created within their community are entirely subject and controlled or open to the potential of being controlled by like large scale logistics, like food being imported from another place, another state, another country, processed in a certain way, transported a certain way, delivered and then refrigerated. Like the amount of energy that goes into this, both like actual consumable energy, but also just labor and time to get food from one part of the world that likely isn't even in season where you live to you, is an incredible privilege of a modern society that really trusts that system is going to continue. Like you have to really, and we all do, a lot of people, people do this implicitly, right? They buy a house in a neighborhood that has no farms anywhere near it. They don't grow any tomatoes. They don't grow potatoes. They don't grow garlic. There's no animals. The city bans the chickens, like all these different things. And if you sit there and you become aware of this, you can almost find yourself in a bit of a panic. I, in a way, live in a desert. There is nothing that grows here. Nothing will grow here, or if anything could grow here, people will not allow it to grow here. The lawns are sprayed. There's, nothing grows except for, like certain grasses anymore. And one day you wake up and realize, hey, if we ever had a situation where the electricity shut off, the gas shut off, the truck didn't make it to the grocery store, we actually would not, as a community, have any food. That's a real scenario. That's not far-fetched. I'm not being extremist or alarmist. That's just a real scenario. Think, how do you get all of your food? And are you buying food that wouldn't grow where you live? And are you buying food that, if it grew where you lived, are you buying it in the season that it would grow in?
Right. I don't think people don't even think about that.
You don't. And the thing about food is it doesn't grow overnight. Right. So people they'll ask me, larger scale distributors at this point, they'll reach out to us asking about chicken and chicken availability, and they'll say like, can you provide chicken year round? Well, yeah, we can, as long as you help, as long as we significantly overproduce during the growing season. Well, what's the growing season? Well, we're in Zone 6B. We're in Indiana, so the growing season for broilers is late March to the second week in October. You go beyond those two, you start to push some extremes. You could maybe make it work, but it gets pretty extreme. So does that mean that I can have chicken available to harvest in December? No, I cannot. Not on pasture. It's not possible. Does that mean, am I going to have certain meat available every single day of every single year if you wanted it, processed that same day? No. There's a cycle. Pigs give birth 2 times a year, not 365 days time, a year. So I have to balance that. Mm-hmm. Cattle takes 9 months for them to gestate, and then it takes 10 months for us to produce rose veal. If you want to finish steer on grass, it takes about 2.5 years, 2 to 3 years. So the awareness of this from even a small-scale farm perspective can be alarming if you don't have any access to farms. My position is to say, maybe we should rethink how we build communities. Why do we build communities with infrastructure for gas and electricity and sewage and all these other things, but we leave out agriculture, which is the thing that everybody goes back to 3 times a day?
Right. It's arguably the most important thing. I mean, when you're in a survival situation, what do we need? Food, heat, shelter. Mm-hmm. It's like, and water. We need these things, and so I think that it is something that needs to be addressed, because we are, again, going into a bubble, and I don't want big government, big corporations to feed us, but that's what's happening. The government subsidizes, and now they're going to subsidize beef. So what does that mean for our beef quality? What does that
mean? Or even the economic, there's a reason you see beef farms still, and you do not see very many small-scale chicken farmers or pork farmers or lamb farmers or anything else. One of those is that the way it works with the dollar today is that it just doesn't math out correct. It just doesn't math. The economics just don't work. Big ag and consolidated feeding operations for chickens and pork have figured out they're so efficient. If we just put them in this one place and feed them this one thing and do it at this humidity and this temperature, they'll get every single time to this weight. Cattle is one of the only things right now today that still stands for the independent farmer across the United States. And that's why you see beef, or cows when you drive through the countryside. But even where I live in a pretty rural environment, in a farming community or an agricultural environment. You are going to be hard-pressed to find very many laying chickens, meat chickens, pigs, or sheep or goats out where I am. You'll see a few more. You'll see horses, bit of a novelty, maybe 4-H. You'll see some lambs every once in a while and some sheep. You'll see some goats every once in a while. You're really not going to see almost any pigs anywhere. In fact, I don't know that I can think of more than one or two people that I know in my entire county or community that has pigs besides me. You're not going to see, our broiler growth. You'll see a family here or there that might raise, a couple of meat chickens, which is phenomenal. And I think that's the best scenario. You should do that. But you're not going to see anybody really doing it at any type of scale, which is why when people drive out here and see us, it's kind of a novelty. It's not that we're doing something really special. It's something that could be done all over the United States. People just don't do it. They just don't want to.
Why do you think that is?
Well, farming uniquely grounds you to where you are. So, like vacations, weather, climate, weather patterns, vacations are going to get canceled. Family events are going to everything becomes about the farm. It's one of the only occupations that we have where you don't really go home from it. You are kind of subject to it all the time. There's lots of situations where this occurs, work emergencies and all kinds of different verticals. But let's say a storm is coming through, and I know I've got 1,000 chickens out there, and this storm, it's going to be maybe a high wind environment. Well, I don't have the luxury of just sitting back and saying, I think they'll be okay. I'm probably going to have to go out there and double check the facility, make sure that we have, shelter set up, that chickens are staying dry, because if that storm comes through and negatively affects them, not only might it slow them down, but it might actually, cause them mortality. That's not something a lot of people experience in many jobs. There are jobs that, obviously have significantly higher severity of consequences. Farming is one of those where the economics of it can absolutely debilitate you. Mm-hmm. I have, we invest an enormous amount of money in these animals and to raise them in a natural way. Well, the problem with the natural way or a more natural way is you're subject to natural consequences. Predators don't care that I'm trying to make a business or trying to raise food for my family. They love me. I provide them food. They call that the nature tax. Mm-hmm. The weather doesn't, I can't just go inside and turn up the heat for the chickens. That's just not the way it works. If we want them to be raised outdoors, then we're subject to the conditions of the outdoors.
Right. I think Joel Sultan said the farmer is the only occupation that you buy at retail prices and then sell at wholesale.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and then everyone, a lot of people want to compare those prices that we have to raise them at and sell them at to justify, not to make a profit, to justify the time and energy that it takes for me to take away from other things that could provide better for my family to do that. Mm-hmm. That's, it's a way that people, it's not that we have to suggest that farming is this higher calling, but it is to suggest that there is a involvement in it and an opportunity cost that is difficult at times to even, economize of sorts.
Right. There's a saying out there why people say, well, eating healthy is so expensive. That's partially true, but you have to understand, ask the question, why is this food so cheap? Some of this other food, like the dollar menu on McDonald's. I mean, that food is nutritionally bankrupt. And it's poison. And, and I've said this before, but the foods that we consume can be the best forms of medicine or the slowest forms of poison. And so this is why, it's so important we talk about food and farming and where our food comes from, because so many people disconnect, we're disconnected already from where our food comes from, and but it makes a massive difference on eating healthy with our level of health. And so many diseases and autoimmune disorders are associated with consuming these industrial processed foods, and it's causing massive illness. And so we have to address this. We have to talk about it, and I know can be doom and gloom and it's a heavy topic, but we have to get back to knowing where our food comes from and supporting the small farmer and locally, because there are food deserts, like you said. I mean, how many food deserts are on the rise right now? I mean,
it has to. I mean, I legitimately worked in environments where we would classify what a food desert was, 10, 15 years ago. It's hard for me not to say that there's at least a sub-kind of food desert being created everywhere now, where it would be defined by a lack of access to food grown in your community. Because if we were really dependent on a truck to bring that food all the time, the reality, like if I just told you, if I said, hey, we can grow all this food, all the food in the world that we need. We know how to do it. We can do it in such a good way that creates great taste, great flavor. It's nutritious. It's good for the environment. It's sustainable. And then I said, but you know what? We're going to actually we're not going to do that here. We're not going to do that here. We're just going to buy it, but we're not going to buy it from like people in our community. We're going to buy it from people, we're going to buy like one part of it from a farm 1,000 miles away. And then we're going to ship it all the way over here. That just seems, I would just think as a community, we'd say, what, we solve for the food, we solve for the shelter thing, we solve for the energy thing. I don't know. We'll just give up the food part. The part that sustains us. That if we don't do, we're not going to make it to the next couple of days. Right. It just seems silly to me.
It's a level of, I don't even know. It's just so people are just naive. They're jaded to where their food comes from. They just go to the store, they buy the food, and they think that milk comes from a carton. That's it. And
chocolate milk comes from a brown cow.
Yeah, right. It's and that's really it's just a disconnect, and there's so many disconnects, like we're treated by the food industry or treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food, and the food industry, we're fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health. And there's another disconnect, but it's like this is why my kids and your kids, they're outside, we help butcher broilers. The kids do it, a couple times a year. They see it in action. They know where their food comes from. The first time we did it was actually quite comical because my kids were like, whoa, what's happening here? And then within, after butchering about 100 or so, they turn their heads into puppets, and it's like kind of disturbing, but they were just, jaded to it. But they saw the process. They witnessed it. They got their hands dirty. They got to experience it. And I think that's so good for children today, because how many children in the public school setting, this is why, I recommend endorsing homeschooling your kids, teaching your kids, raising your kids. But I know not everybody can do that, but getting, teaching your kids about where our food comes from, getting their hands dirty, I think that is the way forward. Because if you look at government and bigger farms and bigger subsidies and, all these systemic pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, you name it, this is poisoning our soil, poisoning our grounds, and in the whole health industry. You mentioned avian flu. They treat these farms as like you got E. coli breakouts, swine flu breakouts, avian flu, all these different things. They scare the people half to death. I don't endorse vaccinations, but they vaccinate all these dumb animals. I shouldn't say that, they're not dumb, but
some of them are definitely dumb. That's okay. Okay.
But it's just my frustration coming through. Yeah. It's like they vaccinate all these animals, and I don't want to eat these animals because they vaccinate them. And so the vaccine world is spilling over to the farming industry because we're ASS backwards on our farming methods.
Yeah, and antibiotic resistance is a very real issue, and so if you ever actually needed to use them, we're flooding the marketplace with a potential for resistance that creates the potential for really bad situations. That's hard to even. It's really bad situations. And I think that, so this is why I'm so excited about farming. I'm very clear, I have a larger social media following, and part of that is because I just share the excitement of what's happening here. It can be a lot of doom and gloom, and I fall into that category at times. I look around and I see the same thing. But what I'm extremely encouraged by is really two things. One, people are becoming more and more aware. And a lot of farmers out there that want to farm the way we're farming, sit there and they might think like, how do I find a market? How am I going to find people to buy? Who would ever afford, who would ever budget to pay for the type of food that we have to grow when they figure out, just the inputs alone are more than what it costs someone to go get a fully cooked rotisserie chicken from a major retail, grocery. And my encouragement for those folks is that the excitement around farms and families that want to farm is so powerful right now. There are so many people who are inspired and excited about it. And I encourage a lot of, small farmers. It doesn't just have to be about food. It can be about like, you're opening up an environment where, maybe a grandmother wants to bring her grandchildren to a small farm for the day and see some pigs and some chickens. And, they want to buy a packet of tomato seeds, go home and grow a tomato seed. And you get to be one of the people who's showing, hey, this is what growing food looks like. There's some cucumbers over there. There's a chicken over there. There's a cow over there. And the little kids will run all around and they're all, bright-eyed and they're excited. And, we see this all the time, all spring through summer and fall. People come and visit us and you just see the certain sets of wonder and freedom come out of people. It's like a breath of fresh air. The realness of it. Things are growing. There's real food here. And they can take any of those things in many situations and they can go home. You can live in an apartment complex and not even have a full balcony. You can grab some oregano seeds or a tomato seed. You can probably grow something in your south-facing window. And then you can take that, and it might not be your entire meal, but you could add that oregano to a pasta sauce. It could even be a pre-made pasta sauce, but you're adding something to that you grew. And if you invited children into that conversation and you watched it grow for, 40 days, like this, the excitement and wonder that comes from these things can be life-changing. It's magnificent.
100%. I mean, kids get super excited to see this. I mean, I get excited. We had a massive garden last year. It's fun. It's fun to grow things.
It is.
It's I inoculated 40 different logs for different mushrooms, and we're trying to get a mushroom farm going, and it's I was tickled pink when I saw logs or mushrooms growing out of the logs. I'm like, it worked.
Right.
It worked. And the kids were super stoked to see that, and so there is an element to that. It's a miracle to see that. And, getting your hands in God's creation, working and tilling the ground, being, a steward of that there's something spiritual about it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what I wanted to say too with it is, I could take a seed or an animal. It doesn't matter. I could take something. I take a seed. I know it needs moisture and I know it needs soil and it might need a little bit of heat, but I can't make it grow. I don't know how it does that, but it does. So I love it because it's this beautiful example that we see all around us of cooperation with God's graces.
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a place devoted to renewal and deep-rooted well-being. Ezra Healing supports individuals and families in soothing the nervous system, releasing accumulated stress and trauma, and restoring the body's God-given ability to repair and thrive. Their method is gentle, discerning, and grounded in honoring how the body was created to function. With steady guidance, thoughtful education, and practical resources, they come alongside each person to foster safety, resilience, and whole person healing. If you're seeking a space to breathe, rebalance, and truly heal, Ezra Healing offers a powerful path forward. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now back to the show.
I don't make the seed grow. I don't know how it does it. I don't know how that works. I mean, I understand, I could understand the science of it. I get that. My whole point is this seed sits dormant on the farm, tucked away until these conditions are met. That's what I get to do. And then it just grows. Mm-hmm. And then it produces more fruit. And then in that fruit are more seeds. And this can just continue. That is such an incredible journey to have the opportunity to be a part of. And God doesn't have to let us do that, but he does invite us into this world to do these things. And, it's almost like we spend so much time as people chasing forms of entertainment that are not good for our soul. And here's one that not only is enjoyable, it can be done with your family or friends, but it actually then nourishes you when you harvest whatever that is. And then you sit down and make a meal out of it. It's just, I think there's so much hope out there right now in the, I want to, that's my encouragement for people. The honest truth is, the prevalence of the farm is fading out, right? That's something we have to acknowledge or we do a disservice. The idea of the family farm is basically dying or dead. I believe so firmly that doesn't have to continue, and that there are so many people who, if they knew a little bit more or had a good business plan or had a good, just a buy-in or someone to come and show them how to do these things, then they would take that risk and they would do it, and their communities would be forever changed for it. Amen. In the better.
Amen. I mean, I think this is, it's inevitable that it's going to cause a revival soon, because it's going to be we're to the point where, I think there is a massive bubble I think there's going to be a food crisis coming. Mm-hmm. That it's going to go back to like the Victory Gardens back in, I think it was World War II, where they everyone started growing. There was a food shortage, so everyone started using their land instead of having a fancy green yard. Let's grow something. Use that
common sense.
Yes,
it's common sense.
And what would the world look like if we all grew our own, had a garden, and then had a community of, you grow tomatoes, I'll grow the herbs, and having these Victory Gardens come back. Why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we? Because we don't think there is a food crisis. We're just comfortable at just going to the store and buying the food. It's easier. I mean, it is a hassle to go out and check the chickens for eggs when it's 5 below outside, and make sure they have the water's not frozen solid. It's like, I can buy a dozen eggs, probably, cheaper than my time that I'm spending and the feed. But there is an element to that. I feel like we, by nature, innately, we want comfort and convenience. We're wired that way, but it's really, we grow stronger when we face those hardships, and there's an element to that. And farming is hard. It's hard. It's hard work, but there is a reward at the end of that. We grow stronger. It's just like in Romans. It's like, it's like what perseverance, or is it I forget the scripture, but it's perseverance, tribulation, perseverance, and the character than hope. Those challenges, those struggles, as long as we keep our eyes on Christ and we see that and we see the value in it, it breeds character, and there's there's value in that, especially with that on our children, passing that on to our children. It's not, you necessarily don't do it for the money, but money follows value. And if we can provide that value, money will follow. But I think that there is such an element to that is just lost. And I think people are seeing that now. They're starting to come around to like, oh, there is, especially like a lot of I don't want to say millennials, because I think I'm considered a millennial by definition. But, or maybe, what is it? Is it my millennial? I don't even know. I'm born 82, but my brother calls me a millennial. But you have like, this generation seeing the light of day now with the food industry and the farm industry. Like, oh, there's value here. And you're starting to see that now, where people are wanting to get back into the farm, because for the last 50 years, it's been a massive, downward slope of that. But
right,
because they don't want the farm, and the farming methods, they stink, they smell. It's not fun. But and I think that is a sign of infection. That's not how a farm should be. Right.
That's a great point, a sign of infection, because the reality is, a wound in that way, an infection often does give off a foul odor. And so, in a lot of these situations, like people will come here and they'll see all these pigs out there and, chickens, and, if an animal just recently drops some manure, that doesn't smell good. But overall, there's minimal to very little smell in these regenerative farms. And, I think it was Salatin as well who talks about that, like, part of the aesthetics of the farm in such a way is that it should not smell bad. So then we have these environments that we just accept in the United States, and I would argue that most people have probably never seen one. It's very out of sight, out of mind in places of the country you probably have never been to. But if you go to a confined feeding operation for pigs, the air, people will talk about like the moment they get anywhere near it, the air is heavy. It's hard to breathe. A chicken farm. If you drive by the long barns and they've got a lot of them contained there, just the overwhelming stench is difficult to. It's something many people have never experienced.
Right, and I don't care what kind of exhaust fans you have on those. They're not enough. I mean, if you ever step inside of those the exhaust fans are covered in Lord knows what, and it's like the air quality. And I always tell people, you want to get healthy, get clean air, clean water, clean food.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really a simple equation here, but what you're saying, you can smell a hog farm a mile away. I got family that they're hog farmers, and industrial hog farmers. This is the funny thing, Matthew, because I love my brother to death, but I was telling about you're getting hogs, maybe in spring, and he's like, oh, they're going to smell terribly. My brother used to clean out hog bins, right? And, and he would hang his overalls in the garage, and you could smell it. And when you were inside, it reeked. And the stench was terrible. And he's like, I don't care, hogs stink no matter what. I don't care what you do. I'm like, dude. And I went out to your farm. It's a regenerative farm, and the hogs didn't stink.
No.
And I went to another regenerative farm, and the hogs didn't smell. Why? Because you were moving them. There's an element to movement. These hogs were meant to move, right? And so walk us through that. Why doesn't your hog stink?
Yeah, it's one of the tenets of our farm. It's the same reason we can put 1,000 chickens out there and there's virtually no smell at all. And it's because you're constantly moving. That the smell that people are describing is effectively a buildup of manure. At a core, that's what it is. It's an overload beyond what the ground can absorb in any reasonable time or can organically decompose into the soil. It's more than what would naturally be there. So, for instance, if you notice, cows, sheep, pigs, goats, animals that walk, they naturally will keep moving. Even if they're in an area where you're like containing them, they're still going to keep moving because they're animals that graze or they move very fast. They would never, there's this idea that pigs are really, really dirty and that they, eat where they manure and all this stuff. That is only the case if you force them to stay in that place forever. Not to be crude, but the same way where if you locked yourself in a bathroom or not a bathroom, but maybe you lock yourself in a kitchen and you can never get out of it. You're going to spend your entire life there. It's not going to smell good. It's just not, because things have to happen. So one of the principles we employ on our farm is movement. Every animal has to keep moving. There's, certain exceptions to weather and, maybe labors and things like that, or injured animals. But in general, the principle is everybody keeps moving. And that movement benefits the soil. It also benefits the health of the animals. If you don't want to give any interventions, antibiotics, vaccinations, things like this, you don't allow the conditions to be created that cause your animals to get sick.
Amen.
It's not difficult, truthfully.
Right. It's simple. It's a simple equation. Getting back to how God created, these animals to be raised, it's like we think we know better than God. We think we know better than nature to get in there and to get these animals in a terrible environment and think that this is going to be a healthy food. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that is the key. Even in health, the body, if you look at the body, we need to move. We need to move well. Movement's a nutrient. Especially in the spine, I always say that, movement in the spine generates 90% of the stimulation to the brain, and so it's important that we move and move well. And that applies. That's a physiological law. That is not just me stating that. That is a physiological law. That's physiology, movements and nutrients. So you apply that to the animals, you apply that to the farming methodology, and these animals are going to be healthier. They're going to be healthier and happier, which means that, we want healthy food. I want healthy food. I want to consume an animal that's healthy. I don't want to, an animal that needs constant antibiotics and constant, to be observed for whether it's sick or not. This is the thing. You have these, processing facilities. You have to have, USDA staff there all times just to watch to see if these animals are sick, because these animals are sick. Because what's the world, the U.S.? I heard stats of 80%. I don't know if this is true, but 80% of the world's antibiotics are administered to America's beef and poultry. So what does that tell you about our beef and poultry?
Yeah, it's the biggest thing I think I can leave people with, out of conversation like this, is that the situation where we find ourselves as a community, we are given we eat food that is created for economic benefits, that is created just to as calorie density, just to get you by. This is not the best food that you can eat. This is not the food that when you think of like cultural places around the world that were renowned for this amazing wine or amazing tomato sauces or these breads that were incredible. All of this has been kind of just it's been diluted in the interest of, hey, we actually just figured out how to make that chicken grow faster for cheaper. Yeah. So we're going to do that instead.
Yeah.
You know, people buy chicken from us, and it's a common review we'll get. I've never tasted chicken like this, or this reminds me of chicken from decades ago, or the color of it is so much different, or it tastes so much better. I don't think I'm doing anything extraordinary. In fact, in some ways, I think I'm doing closer to the bare minimum with our setup. What I'm doing is supporting their natural growth in a more natural environment, allowing for not just natural food intake, but natural movement and behavior. So I don't, a lot of people, they'll say, oh, your pigs are digging in the ground. Why don't you just put a ring through their nose? Why would I want to do that? That would stop them from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you don't want them to do that. Maybe it's not, here's how you get around that. Keep them moving. If you keep them moving, they don't dig to Middle Earth.
Yep.
Why would I want to literally, put something in this animal to hurt it, cause injury to it, and pain to it for its entire life to stop an instinct, not a decision, an instinct. They're not, reasoning with me. And I think that, when it comes to the small-scale farming, we can do so much better and provide, truthfully, for so many people if only people are willing to take a moment and make the decision. We're going to stop the bleeding now. Yep. We're going to make a decision to either grow it ourselves or buy from someone who will.
Right. And I think, too, going back to that, that's an innate instinct by the hog, but utilizing, I was just the regenerative methods of how each animal innately has a purpose in the farming method. It's a symbiotic relationship. How the hogs can help with the composting and mixing the composting in the soil, and the chickens follow the cows and help aerate the soil. They help with cleaning out the bugs. They eat the bugs and manure, and there's just this life cycle. It's a symbiotic relationship. Everything is, reciprocating. Or not reciprocating. What's the word I'm looking for? But they help the farm.
They benefit off each other.
They benefit. Yeah, the symbiotic relationship. But it's this is the whole key of how a farm should be. We have thousands upon thousands of acres of monocrop, farms that are just arguably wasting the land. Because I first got on this topic of I don't know if you heard of restoration agriculture. I think it was Mark Shepard that wrote the book. But he had a 140-acre farm, and what he was producing on this farm would, people would think that he had like thousands of acres. And he's like, no, we're utilizing every square inch of this farm. And, we're bringing things, we're adding things. And there's a documentary, I think, The Biggest Little Farm or something like that. But they're bringing different animals in, and everything's kind of, feeding off each other, and they complement each other in the farm. And it's the way the farm should be. And I think, and it's a beautiful choir that's happening in this farm. It's just unbelievable to see. And I believe that it's a how do I say it? I believe we're getting back to that, and people are seeing that. And farms like yours, Matthew, are the future of farming. This is why we're sitting down and having this conversation, because, to me, this isn't just about, hey, let's have a podcast. This is something that I believe is for our children's children. And this is the future of our health. This is the future of farming. And this is getting back to the roots of how God wants our farms to be. There's real enjoyment here, and it's a beautiful thing to see. So I'm going to give you the last word, Matthew, of word of encouragement, where people can find you, where people can buy your chicken and support you in this operation.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today. CottagePastures.com, that's where you can buy any of the meat we produce, as well as seed garlic. We ship all over the United States. And, one of the things that's emerging as something that people are asking more and more of is if you're looking for, encouragement or hope or advice or recommendations on either establishing a homestead or a small-scale farm, I'm happy to help out in whatever capacity I can. And I encourage people to reach out. Our email is hello@cottagepastures.com. I take all of this from a perspective of hope, and I believe that we have an opportunity to do some really good things here.
Awesome, Matthew. You are doing good things. There's always hope. Hope is the most powerful drug there is, and that should be the only drug given, in my opinion. Matthew, God bless you, my friend. I'm going to give you with one last question. What's your thoughts on Nephilim?
You'll have to come back out here again. We're all coming. I'll come up to you, and I'll bring some pigs over, maybe.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, love and appreciate you, my friend. Thank you, Matthew. Share this podcast far and wide. Go support Cottage Pastures and support Matthew's farm. It's a beautiful farm. Been there. I've seen it firsthand. Matthew was generous enough to let us come out to see his farm and opened up his doors to his home. And so go support him. Share this podcast far and wide, and go to our locals page where you can support this podcast. Thank you, guys. God bless.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?